So in high school, I had a nickname. Very few people called me Paul. Even the staff called me the Tank. I got the name because I was a big guy. I'm still a big guy. But it was more to do with in those days of having the reputation I had in playing rugby. And I love the notoriety of being called the Tank. It wasn't an offensive nickname. I remember many times on a Saturday morning hearing the team shout, "Get the ball to Tank! Get the ball to Tank!" And it was fun, it was great. I remember many times running down the field with the rugby ball under my arm with like 4 or 5 skinny kids just holding on to me and scoring tries. Really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, but one morning in my 4th year, everything changed. I went down into the scrum and I hit my opposing prop forward so hard that I put him unconscious. And at first I thought he was just faking it, but then everybody was saying, "Hey, Tank, the guy's going blue," and he was. He'd swallowed his tongue and he was turning all the colours of blue and purple. Thank God there was somebody there who ran onto the field, knew what they were doing and pulled his tongue out of his throat, and the kid was okay. The next week, due to a lot of complaints, especially from parents, the coach called me into his office and he said, "Tank, sit down. I've got something to tell you." And what he started to tell me was, he was kind of getting across to me that, "Paul, you don't belong with the 4th years anymore." And he said, "I've got some great news for you. I'm promoting you to the first 15. That was the penultimate team in the high school. The problem was that I was only 15 years of age, and that meant that now, because I didn't belong with the 4th year students, I was competing against 17 and 18-year-olds. So I remember my last year of school meant that every Saturday morning I would go onto a rugby field and I would just get the stuffing knocked out of me. Those were the days I got my teeth chipped, and my teeth are still crooked to this day because of just the brutalness of those days. Because I was facing guys every Saturday these guys had beards. I mean, we're talking about ugly guys with beards, with their straps around their heads so they wouldn't get the cauliflower ears. My ears already started to go a bit strange. Some of you guys who play rugby, you'll know all about that. And most of all, the terrible sense of not belonging there, not belonging in that group. And yet the group I'd come from also saying, "Paul, you don't belong." Now that was just high school and it wasn't really that important. But I'm here today to talk about belonging, because it's such an important part of being human. And it can be devastating if you go through life thinking and believing that you don't really belong anywhere. I've got great news for you today. The Bible has a lot to say about belonging. In fact, most of the Bible is about belonging. And my favourite chapter in the Bible, I'm going to read it to you now, is from Ephesians chapter 2 in the New Testament. And I'm going to start reading at verse 1. This is the Message translation. And so just enjoy this, because this is about belonging. "It wasn't so long ago that you were mired in that old stagnant life of sin. You let the world, which doesn't know the first thing about living, tell you how to live. You filled your lungs with polluted unbelief and then exhaled disobedience. We all did it. All of us doing what we felt like doing when we felt like doing it. All of us were in the same boat. It's a wonder God didn't lose his temper and do away with the whole lot of us. Instead, immense in mercy and with an incredible love, he embraced us. He took our sin-dead lives and made us alive in Christ. He did all of this on his own with no help from us. Now God has us where he wants us, with all the time in this world and the next to shower grace and kindness upon us in Christ Jesus. Saving is all his idea and all his work. All we do is trust him enough to let him do it. It's God's gift from start to finish. We don't play the major role. That's plain enough, isn't it? You're no longer wandering exiles. This kingdom of faith is now your home country. You're no longer strangers or outsiders. You belong here. Hey, if you have a Bible, if you still have a paper Bible or even one of those digital ones, that's worth underlining right there. Just want to emphasize that. You belong here. And he carries on. You belong here with as much right to the name Christian as anyone. God is building a home. He's using us all, irrespective of how we got here, in what he is building. Today, I believe these awesome verses are for anyone who has ever felt like they simply don't belong anywhere in this crazy world. You know, our planet is more crowded than it has ever been, but it holds more people than has ever happened who feel disconnected and abandoned and misunderstood or discarded or displaced and lonely. Mother Teresa a few years ago said these words: loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible type of poverty. So right now, today, you can be the richest person in Cheshire East or wherever you're watching this live stream. But if you don't know where you really belong in this world, I believe you're living in the worst kind of poverty. COVID-19 has highlighted just how disconnected we are as a society. People don't know each other anymore. We don't know all of our neighbours. We don't know all the people that we work with, really. And the sad thing is, so often we don't even know the people in our own church. Somebody recently said we're a generation of strangers, and I think that's true. And before long, if we're like that, if we're living as strangers in our society, we find ourselves asking this deep question: where do I belong in this world? Where do I simply belong? 8 years ago this month, the world passed a massive landmark. Facebook made it known across the world that for the first time they'd surpassed 1 billion users. Can you imagine that? 1 billion people on Facebook. That was 2012. But today, did you know today, with the help of the pandemic, almost 2.8 billion people are on Facebook. This year, the company stated that 3.1 billion people were using at least one of the company's core products. That's either Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, or Messenger every single month. And because of that, Boston University recently commissioned a study, and they asked this question: why do people use Facebook? And it was quite telling, the answers to their study. The findings were clear: because we have a deep desire to belong. In fact, the heading of the report said this: we all want to be part of something. Everyone just wants to belong. Isn't that true? In the online aspect of our lives, Facebook, this is what the report said, Facebook offers us that virtual sense of belonging. You and I know that's where the problem is, because we are looking for a sense of belonging, but Facebook only offers us a virtual sense of belonging. We know it's not real. Hey, newsflash this morning, newsflash, you don't have 500 friends, neither do I. It's virtual. But there's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that the church for many years, even though we would criticize Facebook, the church for many years has had the same problem, or worse, because we've created virtual friends. Friends that are not real friends, real connections in our lives. And that's why the Apostle Paul says this. I'm going to repeat what he said in Ephesians 2. Now, this is your home country, people. You're no longer strangers or outsiders. You belong here. What an amazing 3 words. You belong here. God is building a home, and he's using us all, irrespective of how we got here, in what he is building. And I have to confess today, I don't think we've modelled that to the world very well as the church. The church for too long has said this. Let me illustrate it. The church has said this: if you believe like we believe, and then if you behave properly, if you do all the right things and you behave, whatever we class that, whether you dress like us or behave the way we say you should behave, only then can you belong to our club. Only then can you belong to our church. Now, you might think that's exaggerated, but I grew up around church, and most of the time it felt like people were saying, hey, you know what? You've got to believe everything before you can join us. In fact, I was in a church one time, and to even belong to that church, to become a member of that church, you had to pass a test. It was a test of the Bible, and it was 6 pages long, and it went into theology, it went into doctrine. If you didn't get a certain percentage on the test, you couldn't be part of that church. And we've all been in churches where people say, okay, we don't mind you coming here, but you have to behave. You have to do this, this, this. And they've got long lists of things that you have to do before they really accept you and before you feel like you belong. So you must be thinking, how crazy is that? And you'd be absolutely right. It's a crazy thing. It's like we expect people to get their lives together before they even come in to the local church. Like, when you're perfect enough, we will let you in. Newsflash, there's no such thing as perfect people. There's no such thing as the perfect life, and there's definitely no such thing as a perfect church. We are all screwed up. We are all broken. We all have hurts and hang-ups and habits. We've all got things going on in our lives that are just not perfect. When it looks like we're perfect, it's just that we've learned how to cover it up more than the next guy. That's why Jesus says this all the way through the Gospels. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done. In my church, you can find a place to belong. Let's look at that. Yeah, put it the other way around. In my church, Jesus says, you can belong so you can grow to believe the right stuff and then find out what the Bible says and how it can impact your life. And then, only then can you learn how to walk in the way Jesus would have you walk, or learn to behave. See, Jesus' example was totally different than sometimes how we live as the local church. He included people who neither believed or behaved very well in his group, the church, or in his group, the disciples, or whatever you want to call it. Now, I've not got time this morning to go through the list of people, but some of you will know the names of his inner core of people who belonged to him. Let me give you an example. First is Thomas. After 3 years with Jesus, he was a leader. He saw miracles with his very own eyes. But even after Jesus had rose from the dead, he still didn't believe it. He had problems with faith. He had problems with doubt. And Jesus didn't condemn him in that. He just still included him and helped him to feel that he belonged in the midst of his group. I've got no time to show you as well in detail, but check it out yourself. Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7 is the story of the sex worker. Comes to Jesus, and he's at a party, he's out with a group of people. She starts caressing and stroking and kissing Jesus' feet with her hair. She pours oil over his feet. Everybody is complaining. They're saying, this is not how you behave. This is not how a Christian behaves in a church setting. And Jesus said, no, leave her alone. Leave her alone. And he helped that woman to feel like and realize that she belonged in his circle. I think the greatest example is Peter. The Apostle Peter was kind of Jesus' number one guy, but he spent most of his time around Jesus totally, time and time again, getting it wrong. It's like every time he opened his mouth, he said something wrong. Jesus had to rebuke him on countless occasions. And yet you see in the Gospels how Jesus just loved him, how Jesus would just turn to him, put his arm around and say, hey, oh, Peter, you're going to get it someday, it's okay. And that's why Peter wrote years later, years after the Gospels were written, in 1 Peter chapter 2 and in verse 9, Peter said these words to encourage us today. You are chosen. You are a chosen people. You're a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. People who, get this, people who belong to God. There's that word again. You're a people who belong to God. That doesn't mean that you're perfect. That doesn't mean that you've got your theology all together or you know Genesis from the book of Revelation. It doesn't. It just means that there's a place today for you to belong while you're getting your life together and while Jesus is working in your life. As a church, we must never forget, church. We must never forget. Here it is. If someone belongs to God, then surely they can belong right here. I'm going to say it again. Just concentrate on those words as I close this morning. If someone belongs to God, then surely they belong right here. And while they're growing in their belief, and while they're learning to walk the life of faith and the life of obedience and learning how to behave, they can know, those people can know that God's going to send us, that they can belong right here. This is a place where you can belong. This is a place where you can feel like, hey, this is home. And with saying that, I am so excited today because today in Life Church Wilmslow, we're launching life groups throughout the whole of Cheshire East. And, you know, at the end of my talk now, please don't just switch off. Please hang around. Krista's going to come with more information in just a few minutes' time. And as we launch these life groups, I just want you to jump in there and be a part, to be connected and get that sense of belonging, which COVID has really come against in the last 9 months. That sense of just not feeling like I belong anywhere. They are not the complete answer. They're not the complete answer, but they are a start. From this day, we're going to have to start them initially on Zoom because of the nation being locked down and there being local lockdowns, especially in this area of the Northwest. So they're not perfect, but hopefully very soon those online groups will be developing into local expressions in person, in the flesh of Life Church Wilmslow right across Cheshire East. And their aim is going to be simple: to give us a safe place as believers, as people who are on a journey of faith together, where we can say, hey, we belong here. To be a place where we can be ourselves, where we can be real and transparent, where we can let down the masks and the pretense and the religiosity. And you know, if we do that, if we engage with this, when all of those things happen and we can be real with each other, there's a name for when that happens. There's a special name for when all of those things come together. It's called the church. It's called the church.